Hey everyone, thanks for joining me again, and today we'll be looking at a preamplifier with a headphone amp. I have here the Topping A70 Pro, and I'll tell you out the door that I love this unit as a preamp, and having that headphone amplifier just makes it that much more special. I have this unit on loan from Apos Audio, so I want to thank them for sending it over for review, and this unit comes in at $499. And I'll put a link down below if you'd like to purchase one of these units. Let's start off by taking a look at the front of this unit. We have a lovely screen as Topping has on the D70 Pro, Sabre, and Octos. Our first output is the 4-pin balanced XLR, followed by our balanced 4.4mm Pentacon, and the single-ended 6.35mm jack. I would have liked to have seen this unit come with some silicone dust covers to cover up those ports or whichever one we're not using, or have a sliding door that would cover up those ports like the Austrian Audio Full Scone 1. And finally, over here to the far right, we have our encoder. And I love this encoder. It's super satisfying when you spin it across and you hear those relays clicking. Very responsive. The encoder can also be programmed to do different functions as you press the button in. I currently have it programmed to mute with the press. We'll take a look at the back side. On the back side, you'll see a pair of XLRs and RCAs, one in and one out either way. Now, I personally feel that a lot of people would suffice with having just 2 inputs. With my current preamp, I have 5 inputs, although I'm only using 2. One of them is for a DAC, and all my other digital sources actually connect to that DAC and send the signal to my preamp, and the other one I use for my phono stage, my turntable. With this unit, you do have 2 inputs, but a great benefit is that you have this extension control on the right side, where you can plug in the EXT90. That unit is an add-on box that adds an additional 3 XLRs and 1 more RCA as well, so that'll give you a total of 6 inputs. And that should be plenty to take care of all your devices. That unit adds another $249, bringing the total cost to around $750. We also have a set of trigger ins and trigger outs. And I usually praise DACs and amps that have the trigger in and trigger out. But on this case, being that it's a preamp, it would have been more convenient to just have a trigger out to keep setup a little bit simpler for people new to the separates world. As you usually want the preamp to be the first thing you turn on, then onto other devices, and finally your power amp, which is normally a good practice to avoid unwanted pops and thumps. And here's how I set mine up. In this case, I have a cable plugged in to the 12-volt trigger output of the A70 Pro, going into the 12-volt input of the D70 Pro Sabre, and a second cable connected to the 12-volt out of the D70 Pro Sabre, going into the input 12-volt of the Iota VX power amp. Now when I hit the power button, the preamp turns on, then the DAC, and finally the power amplifier. And I can power them all down as well. For the 12-volt trigger, I used a 3.5mm TS to TS cable. I'm sure you can use a TRS to TRS if that's all you have. And you can tell by looking at the metal parts, you have a tip, a little indent, and a sleeve. That's TS. Or you might have a tip, a middle part, which is the ring, and a bottom part, which is the sleeve. And that should correspond on both sides. A TS cable is not supplied. After that, we have a ground lift switch, and finally our IEC mains connection. The A70 Pro also comes with a remote control. Nothing special on the build quality. It's again that plasticky build. However, it does have one standout feature, and that's the addition of 2 programmable buttons. You can program the C1 and C2 buttons to whatever options you want set up on the preamp. You have mute, volume, dimmer, and gain controls. The options are well thought out. As for power on the headphone amplifier side of things, this unit gives you a ton of power with up to 17 watts of power. You're most likely not going to need anywhere close to that. All the specs you read about this unit are super clean, but that doesn't really tell you about the tone of this unit or what it does to the sound. I started listening to the A70 Pro at my desktop with the SMSL SU1 DAC, then with the DOC U8 DAC, and finally with the Topping D70 Pro Sabre. I did have a small issue. When I connected the SU1, I did notice that when I would crank the volume up all the way to 0, but have nothing playing through the computer, I was getting a noticeable hiss. I thought it might have been the noisy computer because that SMSL SU1 has a USB-C connection to the computer and then RCAs to the preamp. So my first step was to change the cable. I have a separates cable here, and this cable has the USB-C that goes into the DAC, and then we have a split USB-A's, and one is labeled data and the other is labeled power, and this separates the power from the data to try to prevent noise. Unfortunately, that didn't fix the situation. Then I remembered the unit had a ground lift switch, so I flipped the unit around, went to the switch, flipped it up from ground to lift, and the noise was gone. So great feature to have. You don't always need it, but it's great to know you have it when it's there. I didn't have that noise issue with the DOC U8 or with the Topping D70 Pro Sabre. Now, preamps aren't made to add anything to the sound. They're more so to prevent the least amount of damage to the input signal that's coming in. And the selection of the components that the manufacturer makes will determine that. The capacitors, the resistors, the relays, the traces, the op amps, the input and output stages will all have an influence on its final sound signature. And the A70 Pro here is super neutral. Nothing pops more than anything else. Which means your choice of your input signal, whether it be a DAC, a CD player, a streamer, or a phono stage, are going to dictate the sound. As for the sound stage, once again, that'll be true to the source. This isn't going to give you a bigger sound stage, it's just going to help you from collapsing the one you already have. The better your source, the better the sound output. So again, this unit is super neutral, the highs are super crisp and clear, mid-range and vocals just sound natural, and the bass, while not full, does have some energy to it. I wouldn't call this a bassy amp at all, as much as energetic and punchy. You can listen to and compare a bunch of preamps, and some will be warmer, some will be crisper in the highs, some will have tighter bass or looser bass or whatever. And you get to choose what's right for your system. What I love about the A70 Pro is it makes things less complicated by taking one variable out of the mix there. Or at least removes that variable to a great degree because it has a super clean sound. I compared the A70 Pro to my Jongsun JA1 preamp, which is a $500 preamp only. The first thing I can say is that the topping A70 Pro has much more granularity in the volume control. I can fine tune it quite a bit more, particularly in low volumes. Listening at high volumes, the JA1 definitely is a bit warmer and fuller, but not quite as crisp. At low levels, you'll also hear that additional clarity coming through on the A70 Pro. And the A70 Pro has a darker background at all levels. I had planned on replacing the op amps on my JA1 from the included Texas Instrument chips to the Muses chips with the goal of getting a little more clarity. But that's a $200 upgrade on a $500 preamp, putting it around $700. This unit, as is as $500, is a solid choice. This would be a great selection for an analog preamp for a starter to mid-range system. My opinion is, if you split the cost of the A70 Pro into headphone amp for $250 and analog preamp for $250, you have a heck of a value here with incredible performance. If you need both headphone amp and preamp, you have yourself the deal of the year, and I would highly recommend this unit. There's just something wonderful that analog preamps bring to the table, and this A70 Pro is one of those awesome pieces. Now, I'm not saying digital preamps are horrible, but I can say that my WIM Mini, horrible when I do control the volume on that unit. My Cambridge Audio Streamer, the 851N, with a 32-bit Shark processor, I lose soundstage. When I'm listening via Bluetooth through my phone and bring the volume down there, I definitely lose dynamic. Now, ROON, on the other hand, which is using much more computer processing power, does an excellent job without losing any quality. On that one, I can't hear too much of a difference compared to my Jongsun. Of course, my system is always evolving, and we'll see what a higher end preamp does later on down the line. Alright guys, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.